Good afternoon, everybody.
Coming, I guess.
We'll call this afternoon's meeting of the Diversion Authority Board to order. Our board chair, Mary Sherling, is out of town today, so I will be acting as chair this afternoon. The first item of business will be the roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherling, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Steen.
Here.
Dr. Mahoney,
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Here.
Mr. Grinberg.
Here.
Mr. Judd, Mr. Hendrickson.
Here.
Ms. Carlson, Mr. Campbell,
Here.
Mr. Wayland,
Here.
Mr. Thorsted, Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
All right, thank you. Our next item, number 2, is the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Rick, second by Tony. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It's the same sign. Motion carried. Item number 3, approval of the agenda.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion by Mr. Whalen, second by Chuck. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. Item number 4 is our PMC report, and for our first time now for official business, we're going to have our Executive Director, Joel Paulson, start us off with the PMC report.
Well, thank you, Mr. Campbell. It's a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon, board. I'm just going to make a quick little announcement. The PMC report from now on is going to be called the Executive Director Report. So I'll be giving this in the future. For this meeting, we'll have Kim Daly finish up with the PMC report, and I'll turn it over to her.
All right. On the program controls report, their overall program status, the program estimate at completion, the EAC in 2018 dollars of $2.75 billion. Actual cost to date as of July 31st, 2019 was $479,087,000, leaving a remainder or an estimate to complete of $2.275 billion. The program fiscal 2019 revenues report is provided. They did add a line for cash reserves down at the bottom. The total revenue sources equal $162,723,000. And there we have the cash budget, the fiscal year 2019 cash budget of the $162 million paid to date as of July 31st, 2019, a little over $40 million. Leaving a remaining budget of $122,199,000. And this is just some dashboards related to the fiscal year 2019 budget. To date, we have spent about $41 million. The plan was to spend about $108 million at this time. So to date, we've spent about 25% of the budget, and we're in about 3/4 of the time allowed, or the time set aside for the fiscal year 2019. Executive Director approved contract items. The Executive Director approved 3 task order amendments for HMG. Task Order 13, Amendment 21 for levy design and design support. Task Order 17, Amendment 8, Work Package 42 services during bid and construction. And then Task Order 30, Amendment 2, property structure mitigation. The Cass County Joint Water Resource District approved contract items. These are all for appraisals. There are 5, and they are contracts were, task orders were awarded to Integra, Compass, Patchen, Tinjum, and GE Bach. Activities and achievements for the overall program. We supported the submission of the LOI for the EPA WIFIA, supported submission of the Minnesota grant application, as well as supported the financial plan update. We reactivated the P3 procurement and updated the P3 procurement schedule. In-town work status. These are a couple of pictures, latest pictures of the Work Package 42E, which is the 2nd Street South Flood Mitigation Project. The areas in the circle are the areas that are related to the Diversion Authority project. Alongside of this is some of the North Dakota DOT work on 2nd Street. Okay, the project's about 60% complete. The flood wall is complete. One of the 3 paving lanes is complete. and 3 out of the 3 structures are complete. These are just a couple of other more detailed pictures. It shows the first paving lane that's completed, some work on the stairs going up to the plaza area. Land acquisition and property mitigation status, activities and achievements, there are a bunch. 35 parcels appraised. Appraisals were approved in the last month. 2 parcels were acquired in the last month. Purchase agreements are underway, particularly for the channel parcels. Updating the deadline for the acquisition of property rights for the P3 portion of the project. Originally, we were shooting for a spring 2020 to acquire all the lands for the channel. That's been moved to fall of 2020 because of the process involved in the eminent domain or some of the acquisition processes that are required, and it falls in line with the procurement schedule. Contracted with the appraisers for the valuation of property rights for the Western Tieback Levee, the I-29 road raise, the Red River control structure, and other upstream properties. Continued securing rights of entry to support the Southern Embankment and I-29 efforts, as well as securing the bio-geo easements. Met with the City of Drayton regarding the Drayton Dam project. Continued support for the ag study, and then continue to gather data to support the phase 2 flowage easement evaluation process. And this is just a snapshot out of the property status report that shows completion. The green items, the green squares there are acquired properties. So we're making some progress. All right, on the public outreach and social media, a lot of hits on Twitter. And this the analytics report that's provided, as well as sent the FEMA Clomar letters and offers to meet to 31 area jurisdictions for the Clomar process. Created a new version of the project flyover animation, which I think is going to be shown later on in the meeting. It made various presentations and also supporting the Minnesota legislative bonding tour. In the short term, over the next 3 months, we're continuing to support the contested case hearing and the Buffalo Red River Watershed District permit challenge processes. We anticipate completing appraisals for all diversion channel properties and then initiate appraisals for the Western Tieback and the I-29 road race project. There'll be a meeting with the North Dakota Office of the State Engineer staff on November 11th to review mitigation requirements and permit conditions. There'll be outreach to the upstream mitigation area property owners, continue securing rights of entry for the Southern Embankment, and negotiate scope for the Phase 2 flowage easement valuation, as well as preparing the questionnaire for the SRF loan programs. What else we have? Present and host a booth at the North Dakota Water Convention in December. Also on short term, we would welcoming the Army Corps of Engineers new Commanding General Toy to the Fargo-Moorhead area, present multiple jurisdictions related to the FEMA Clomar, presentations to those folks, attend the Business Leaders Task Force meeting. We're finalizing the development of the P3 draft RFP, which currently we're expecting to issue in December. Updating the P3 program risk register. We also anticipate substantial completion of a couple of the projects, the Work Package 43CD, Work Package 42E, and the Work Package 50A. And then initiate bidding phase for the Work Package 43G, which is the OHB wetland mitigation, as well as organizing a leadership trip to Washington, D.C. In the long term, 3 to 6 months out, we anticipate issuing the draft RFP for the P3 project, initiate bidding for a couple of projects, the Work Package 43 D5 and the Work Package 50B, that's another home demolition project, and then solidify the upstream structure mitigation requirements in coordination with permitting agencies. And that wraps it up for the PMC report.
Thank you, Kim.
Yep.
Any questions?
I hate to go back to your first slide, but the cash reserves, is that ability to take a loan? Is that in our loan package, or where you say cash reserves 29 million, what is that?
I'd have to get back with you on the answer. This was provided by Kent Costin
Okay.
on this.
It's the first
And,
one, first slide.
First slide, right up here.
You had the cash reserves, I'm assuming, or maybe it's further down.
Yeah, the cash reserves right here.
Right there, yep.
Yep, on the bottom line there.
Okay, thanks.
But I can get with Kent and get back to you with that.
Right? Any other questions? Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move into item number 5, the Army Corps of Engineers report. Terry Williams is here today.
Good afternoon, Terry Williams, Corps of Engineers. I'd like to refer to our monthly update. You should have a copy of this in front of you. Number 1, the diversion inlet structure. Ames is on schedule to complete the work that they had planned for this construction season. They've been excavating the site to grade as weather is allowed, and the pile load test is scheduled to begin mid to late October. We're hoping mid-October because that's when CG Toy will be here, and we'd love to be able to show them the pile load test at the inlet site. Number 2, Wild Rice River structure. We received proposals on 11 September. Evaluations continue, and we're still on track to have an award of that contract by Thanksgiving. Number 3, the Red River structure design. The physical model construction remains on schedule, and our plans to have a 35% design in February of 2020 remains on schedule. Number 4, Southern Embankment. We continue to do borings and surveys for the entire alignment. The Western Tieback is the first contract we plan to award in 2020, and we are currently working with the sponsors on solidifying the real estate needs for that feature. Number 5, cultural resource mitigation. Work under task order number 2 started this week. And all of that, the field work is supposed to be done by 1 November. That's required by our task order. Number 6, Natural Resource Agency meeting. We moved this from a couple of weeks ago to 3 October to allow more of our agency partners to attend. So that current date for that is set for next week, the 3rd of October. And number 7, CG Toy will be visiting the Fargo area on the 16th of October. And a bio is included on the back. He assumed command of our division in July and has extensive experience with the Army Corps of Engineers as a division commander and a district commander, and also at headquarters. With that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Item number 6, administrative legal. John, do we have anything today? Okay, nothing on item number 6. Number 7, public outreach. Roger is not here today, but Rocky is going to give us an update on yesterday's meeting.
Sorry about that. I was expecting John to talk a while. Rocky Schneider with the PMC. We had a public outreach committee meeting yesterday. You heard from Kim some of the updates. Wanted to report on the Colmer mailings that went out to 31 jurisdictions. We've heard from about 6 or 7 of them now, and Joel is scheduled to go out and meet with a number of the entities. So that'll be a good outreach to do. Chair Sherling also asked that we show this video. It's not the flyover that Kim talked about earlier. Maybe I can send that out to the board. That's a good educational animated one. This is footage from yesterday at the inlet structure to show some dirt moving, and since everybody doesn't get out there on a regular basis, this is Ames construction just south of Horace at the inlet structure that Terry just talked about as well.
Wow, it's a big structure, isn't it, dude?
So you can see the channel that goes right down the middle there, and then the 2 pedestal locations on the side. You can see the scale of that when you look at the excavator there in the middle of the channel. Should have put some nice music to the background. It's only a minute long, but I think it's
You can sing, Rocky, come on. So would there be a structure between the 2 pilings? Either be some structure to control the water?
My belief is that's where the gates will be. So if somebody tells me otherwise, I'm pretty sure that's it.
Terry nodded, yes. Yeah.
We did talk at Outreach Committee about either on the animated flyover or a video like this, where we can put actually the design of the structure in sort of like a 3D fashion so you can see what it's going to look like. If you remember at the groundbreaking, we had the Google glasses, Google Cardboard thing that had the design in there. There's lots of options, but the flyover is a pretty neat way to see it. Because when you drive by the road, you can't get this sort of scale. I think Roger Olson mentioned that it was a good previous shot of this. You could see the paving of County Road 17 as well, traffic moving smoothly on it. Tammy just texted me that there is music, but I didn't unmute it. So, my fault. Because I think you get the picture there. It goes on for another hour if you want to keep watching.
Okay, so you also have another short video to show us too.
I wasn't planning to show that. I certainly can.
I'm talking about the one with Jason.
Oh, yeah, we can show that one. I hope. There we go. So we did these, minute facts, and the flood this year, I think a lot of people kind of didn't notice that it flooded, but in rural Cass County, the flood was somewhat dramatic in areas. So I'm gonna listen until I get some audio. And we did these minute facts with Jason Benson.
We had several hundred miles of county roads that had some impact, whether a culvert washing out or water over top of the road and washing some of the gravel off, and then others where we had to bring in a lot of additional material, reset culverts and get the road reshaped before we could allow traffic on it. Financially, to the townships, you're adding that much more because they've gone through a winter where they're having to spend so much extra money on plowing the snow, and now they're having to spend that additional money to get their roads repaired. Now the tributary rivers, both the Cheyenne, the Maple, as well as the Rush and Lower Rush, dump their additional floodwaters into the diversion, and only a certain amount of flow will be allowed into the protected area.
There's actually a second one of these if you have another 55 seconds.
Just this spring, which didn't have a significant flood on the Red River, for parts of rural Cass County with the tributaries had significant flooding. Over 80% of all of our county sandbagging and efforts went to rural areas within the diversion protected area. All of those areas will be protected with the diversion. This is the best solution for not only our urban areas and urban residents in Fargo and West Fargo, but also for the rural residents. This is going to be a game changer for them in the reduction in impacts during these spring floods on their access to homes. This is Cass County's permanent flood protection plan.
We found these sort of short, consumable education facts are a good way to get information out there on the sort of complicated nature of the project. And just maybe to plug our YouTube channel, it's just youtube.com/fmdiversion. Got all sorts of good historical and educational information on there.
Anything else, Rocky?
Nope, that's all I have unless there's any questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move into, and I don't see our business leaders task force group here today, so we'll move into the land management meeting, and I believe we're gonna have Eric Dodds give us a report on that meeting.
Good afternoon, Eric Dodds, A2S. Happy to report out on the Land Committee. We met yesterday afternoon, shared with them the property status report, which you also have in your packet, item 8B. Maybe a few other things I'd just touch over before we get to that. Earlier last week, a couple of us went up to meet with the city of Drayton regarding the Drayton Dam replacement project. It had been some time since we had met with them, but we had a good discussion. They are still very much interested in replacing the Lowhead Dam in the city of Drayton and with the Rock Rapids, so that was positive. As Ms. Williams from the Corps mentioned, we are working to get ready to do appraisal work and start acquiring land for the western tieback levee south and west of the inlet structure. We should be getting the real estate drawings very soon and have appraisers ready to go to get moving on that project. We've also been working quite a bit recently on firming up all the nuts and bolts details of the quick take process. Just to be assured, we don't ever plan to use that as a first resort. We've acquired over 319 parcels so far and have used the quick take process 5 times. One of those went through the full process, the other 4 settled before that. But the quick take process is something that we have to use to provide a date certain for the P3 contractor in the bidding process. And so as it was mentioned earlier, we've firmed up the deadline for the acquisitions and been working really diligently over the last month or more to firm up all the steps of the quick take process and feel like we're in a good position to make sure we meet all the deadlines. The other thing we mentioned yesterday for the Land Committee is that we are working on some additional policies related to farmstead and rural residential acquisitions and relocations. Many of these residential properties have outbuildings of various size and nature, and that just provides a few elements that we need to be diligent about having a good policy. And so we're working on that. We'll be working with the Land Committee to firm up those policies in the coming months here. With those comments, I'd maybe just turn your attention to item 8B in your packet, which is the property status report. Just real quickly on the second page of that property status report, as Kim noted earlier, there's a growing number of green parcels along the north end of the channel. We have the channel west of West Fargo and Horace, where you see a lot of blue colored parcels. We're in negotiations with all those property owners and kind of working with all of them to try to get a deal struck. Our hope is that once somebody flinches, maybe we'll have a bunch of dominoes that fall and we'll be able to secure all that property. So we're working on those negotiations. You'll also note that there's just a small handful of parcels along the channel that are still this orange color. That means we are waiting on appraisals. I think we have 3 or 4 appraisals that'll be coming up here due in the coming weeks. And so after that, we'll be in negotiation on all of the channel properties and working to close on them. So making good progress. Any questions?
Questions? Eric, one thing, this afternoon prior to this meeting, our MCC JPA meeting, we had held our meeting this afternoon, and there was one item that we acted on that was a resolution regarding some, do you want to just give the board a little update on what actions we're taking today?
So maybe just a little bit of a lead up to that. The project, in the property status report, you'll see a page titled Environmental Monitoring Areas. Looks like this page here. These are areas where we need to acquire easements to enable the Corps and its contractors to conduct environmental monitoring. All told, there's over 400 parcels that we need to obtain these easements on. Over the last month or so, we've been reaching out by watershed to the property owners and presenting them the easements, as well as hosting some neighborhood meetings with sort of targeted invites. That process is underway in North Dakota. Generally, we're working through the process, and our land agents are meeting with property owners, and we're making some progress. On the Minnesota side, what Commissioner Campbell referenced is we asked the MCC JPA board earlier this afternoon to approve a resolution authorizing our land agents to start contacting the property owners in Minnesota to get rights of entries. Those rights of entries are necessary to conduct different design surveys, soil borings, other things of that nature. And so with that resolution, we'll be proceeding with these easements as well as additional design work on the southern embankment portion on the Minnesota side. And then maybe if I can, yesterday during the committee meeting on this same page here, there was a question regarding the $76,000 that were spent. We did look into that after the question yesterday. You'll notice that there's just a small number of green boxes on the left side, and then those green boxes are supposed to cost us $750 each, and so the math doesn't appear to work out. But the $76,000 represents monuments, like a survey monument that was placed on these environmental easement areas. And so those survey monuments, we were paying property owners $250 per monument. And so this math works out where we have a little over 300 of those monuments that have been placed out in the field at these environmental monitoring sites. And so that's what the $76,000 was spent for.
Thank you, Eric. Any other questions? Right, we'll move into item number 9, the finance report. Tony, are you going to?
Mr. Chairman, item 9A largely was covered by Kim on item 4 in the PMC report. Just to quickly recap, expenditures to date are a tad over $494 million. Second page of your 9A handout would detail the net position of our cash at $97,100,000. And again, the numbers in the budget synced up with Kim's report. And then you have a list of other expenditures. So I would move that we accept the report under 9A. Answer any questions if there may be any.
Okay. We have a motion to accept the report.
Second.
Second by Mr. Steen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried.
Mr. Chairman, item 9B then that before you is the voucher request for approval to Cass County Joint Water Resource District in the amount of $474,225.37. Dorsey Whitney for legal services, $135,166.34. Onstead Twitchell, $99,892.98. And Cass County for reimbursement of blacktop patching, $226,263.83. I'd move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Mr. Chairman, 9C has been deferred to the next month meeting for the review of the 2020 cash budget. We did not address that yesterday. And moving to 9D then, the financial plan that Mr. Olson's going to start for us.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimberg. I'm going to present the financial plan here to the board. A lot of work's been put into this. It's been one of the primary things I've been working on since I've started in my position. Martin, John, and I have put together this slideshow for the board today. I'll present it. We'll take some questions afterwards. So let's begin. Presentation agenda today will focus on grant funding updates for the board, Diversion Authority near-term goals, the financial plan summary, and then I'll give some closing comments. If the board can recall, in 2016, the project partnership agreement with the federal government was agreed upon at $450 million. In 2019, the amendment was pursued with the federal government to increase the federal cost share to $750 million, and those are in 2015 dollars. What that means is, as we look at the expenditures through the course of construction, that the 2015 dollars, as they escalate, amount to an approximate $900 million. The Minnesota funding update, action still continues on the Minnesota funds. Moorhead and Clay County formed the Joint Powers Agreement to acquire property rights and pursue state funding for the project. $86 million has been requested for the diversion project related to the work. $46 million of that's been requested by the city of Moorhead, and $40 million of that's been requested by the Moorhead Clay County Joint Powers Board for property acquisition. $7 million was secured in the first year of the requests, and our next steps are going to be to prepare for the Senate Capital Investment Committee tour in early October and begin positioning for legislative lobbying work in anticipation of the Minnesota legislative session upcoming. Our North Dakota funding update that we've incorporated into the financial review. In 2019, our request was $870 million from the of legislative intent and $250 million in low-interest loans. The board can recall that we were approved up to a legislative intent of $750 million after the last legislative session. $437 million has been approved to date. Legislative intent to appropriate $313 million balance will be in 2021 through 2029 bienniums. The state legislature advised us to pursue a number of actions. One of those actions is directed to secure the P3 bids and formalize the state funding and financing needs. We're currently working on the draft P3 RFP, with that expected to be out to the developers at the end of December. Our current schedule is to anticipate acquiring bids from the developers late next summer into early next fall. That would position us to have a bid in hand as we prepare for the North Dakota legislative session, which would allow us to lock in those costs for the P3 portion. And then we also know and have locked in the costs at the federal cost share level. I'll turn it over to Martin now. He's going to explain some of our near-term goals and explain some of the meat of the financial review.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Martin Nicholson. I'm with Jacobs and part of the PMC team that's assisting the Diversion Authority in implementing the diversion project. So as Joel pointed out, there are a number of near-term goals that support a funding request to the 2021 North Dakota legislature. All of the actions we're going to talk about and review today are consistent with the direction that the Diversion Authority received coming out of the North Dakota legislative session in 2019. So there are more slides over the next 3 bullets. Joel's mentioned bidding the P3 and locking in the costs. Second is to designate cost for future North Dakota legislative funding, and that is really to address the gap in grant funds that resulted from the funding that was allocated in the last legislative session. And the last is to pursue and obtain long-term loans. So in terms of bidding the P3, one of the actions that is necessary was to ring fence the P3 financing, which would allow the procurement to move forward. And what does ring fencing mean? Ring fencing really is around identifying specific funds dedicated to the successful developer. And that is for the purpose of demonstrating to the proposers and rating agencies that sufficient funds will be available to pay the milestone and availability payments when due. The developers bring a significant amount of debt and equity to the table. Unlike a traditional design bid build project, they have skin in the game. And so this helps assure them that they will get paid when they have payments due in the long term to pay them back over their 30-year period. It's to be accomplished through the legal structure of the transaction. It's very similar to a bond transaction from a financial standpoint. Things like first liens on sales tax revenues and the rest that provide them that assurance. And John is here and can certainly answer questions with respect to the legal structure. Because the Diversion Authority has specifically dedicated funds to the P3 developer, the legislature will be asked to fund those designated costs at a later date. And I'll go into a little more detail on that in the presentation. So the proposed P3 contract schedule that Joel outlined is as follows. We're re-engaging the P3 proposers. We have notifications out to them for them to confirm their ability to re-engage and the schedule that they need to do so. We anticipate that proposals are due and the P3 costs locked in late 2020, with construction starting in 2021 in earnest in that construction period. Channel construction should be complete by 2026, and that would be the point at which availability payments would begin. And that is the transition between construction costs, building the project, and paying the developer to maintain and operate that facility for 30 years and paying them back for the debt and the equity that they brought to the table during construction. At the bottom of the slide are the estimated milestone payments. And they total approximately $763 million in this financial plan. And you can see the amounts on the bottom of the slide. Those amounts are going to be bid both in timing and amount by the proposers. So we fully expect them to be different when the actual bid is received, but these are the amounts that we are estimating and completing the financial plan at this point. Those are also the dollar amounts that the Diversion Authority would be responsible for paying during construction to the developer. Second was the designate costs for the 2021 legislative intent request. And again, these are subject to change, and these are in 2018 dollars. But the first would be an alternative bid for the P3 procurement that accounts for around $20 million of that. There are 2 county bridges and recreational elements that, minor recreational elements that would be planned to be constructed later in the project. They're on the southern end of the channel, and as such, we don't expect the developer to start on those bridges immediately. Gives us opportunity to secure those grant funds that we've been talking about. Those funds would be funded outside the P3 availability payments on the capital side. Second is land acquisition, about $84 million, and those are flowage easements and flowage easements options to lock in future costs. These flowage easement options are a component of the Minnesota permit recommendation, and actually may be advantageous to some of the landowners in the staging area for not having that easement be placed on their property immediately, but wait till later in the project. We would exercise those options in the years 2024 to 2026. The last is in-town Fargo projects. There's about $16 million worth of projects that are scheduled in the out years in 2025 to 2026, primarily pump station reliability improvements and home buyouts. And so the total of that is around $120 million. And it's important to note that there's no change in what will be built and no delay in the project final completion. So the project should be operational at its originally scheduled date, assuming everything moves on time. And this designated cost process to account for that gap in grant funds doesn't change the overall project completion date. I'll turn this slide over to John Shockley to talk about available loan programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So as part of the finance plan, our goal has been to deliver to the project the lowest cost capital that we can get out in the market, and that relies upon finding loan programs that are issued either through this federal government or through the state government. And as part of that challenge, you'll recall we had asked originally for our legislative proposal for the last 2019 session was to obtain a low-interest, long-term loan through the state of North Dakota. We did not receive that as Senate Bill 2275 was not successful in the North Dakota legislature. And so as part of our effort, we started to look to other resources that we could utilize to help balance the financial plan. And the first of those items is a US EPA WIFIA loan. That has been applied for, that was submitted in July. This board will recall authorizing the submission of that letter. We should hear shortly whether or not we have obtained that loan. That was a loan in the amount of $510 million. There's a process whereby applicants are invited to apply. Once you're invited to apply, it's a due diligence process that leading in the final issuance of the loan. We are also working with Army Corps of Engineers regarding their WIFIA program. The WIFIA program has two components, a US EPA program and Army Corps of Engineers program. The EPA program, as I indicated previously, had already been stood up. Army Corps is still working on standing up their program. Once that program is fully stood up, we anticipate submitting our application to that program when it's available. We are also working through the state revolving loan fund through the state of North Dakota. That is referred to as for drinking water and clean water portions. That loan will be in the amount of $50 to about $100 million, depending upon the eligible components. We're currently working on getting those items identified and on the list for approval in the future as we need to draw on those loans. PABs, that stands for Private Activity Bonds. We have an application submitted. We have to formalize that process, but what PABs are they are bonds that are allowed to be issued on behalf of the private developer, which will lower their cost of borrowing, which in turn lowers the cost for the project. And then finally, if and when the state of North Dakota were to create a low-interest, long-term interest or loan program, we would go ahead and apply for that loan. At the Finance Committee yesterday, there was a great question about what are we doing to flip some of our short-term borrowing into longer-term borrowing because the interest rates are so low. Each of these loan programs allows you to lock in a long-term low interest rate, and they are what are referred to as drawdown loans. So for example, with the WIFIA loan, if we receive that WIFIA loan, it would be for $510 million. Unlike a traditional bond where you get the full $510 million at the time that it's issued and you have to start debt repayment immediately, it is a drawdown loan, so you draw it down as needed to either match up to milestone payments or other project expenditures. And the interest and repayment doesn't start until after the transaction closes. So that's part of that goal of flipping some of that short-term debt cost into longer-term lower interest rates. And I think Martin is going to go over some of the summary points.
To the meat of the numbers. I thought it would be helpful to take an opportunity to review what the process has been in terms of getting to the numbers that we're going to review here in a couple of slides. And that is a slide that was first presented back probably in 2012 with respect to how we approach putting a cost estimate together in a cost-loaded schedule that includes what activities we can identify, what the costs are for those, how they are going to be constructed from a sequencing perspective, and put cost by month together. And that really is around your 2.75 billion cost estimate in 2018 dollars. When we have that information, you put that into a financial model, which then adds cost escalation, because this is a long-term project. It's not built in a year or two, it's built over 6+ years. Adds the cost of financing, what interest rates that involves, and adds all the revenue sources, potential revenue sources to pay the bills. So once you have that financial model, you can then look at what are the obligations that the diversion authority are going to have to be paid over the life of construction. So the financial plan looks at that from a both funding and financing perspective. And this graph represents a little different picture than what you may have been looking at before. This is not full total program costs. These are the costs that the diversion authority are accountable to pay through the life of construction. So this is very similar to the checks that you're going to have to write and approve as a finance committee and a board through construction. It doesn't include the federal costs because those are handled and implemented through the federal process and handled through a different funding and financing process. The funds on this graph total about $2 billion, and this is forward-looking, so it begins in July of this year and goes through the end of construction. You might question why there are bars in 2027 and 2029. That is a reflection that the current state legislative intent includes funding in 2027 and 2029, and so we're showing that as applied in those years. So the next question is, well, where do you get the money to write all these checks? So the money comes from, obviously, grant sources, state of North Dakota, state of Minnesota, sales tax revenues, and like anyone else who doesn't have cash in their bank account, they've got to borrow to make a big purchase. So that's public financing, both short and long term. And the construction and short-term financing costs are paid using a number of multiple sources. This graph has, starts with at the bottom with green in sales tax pay-go, about 330 million of sales tax revenues that will come to the table during construction. It is not present in 27 and beyond because those sales tax revenues are transitioned from construction dollars to availability payments. So this is all about construction and paying for the cost of building the project, not maintaining and operating and paying the developer. Next graph, we'll get into that one. SRF loan draws are shown at $50 million. As John pointed out, that could be 50 to 100. There are construction financing draws of about 350 million. Those are improvement bonds and other sources of borrowing that you do during construction to complete your payment obligations. You have about 97 million of cash in the bank today. That's applied, shown here in 2021. North Dakota State and Minnesota funding remaining to be applied, about 571. And that's a combination of the current legislative intent plus backlog plus Minnesota funding. So the number doesn't equal what you might think of in terms of the total commitment of the state, both states together. The WIFIA loan, or the long-term low-interest loan draws of 510 million are shown, and you can see large amounts in 2022 and 2024 in yellow. Those, if you think back to the milestone payment slide, that's largely to pay off those big payments that the Diversion Authority is going to owe the developer as milestone payments. And the final crosshatched area are those designated grant funds of 120 million. And those, again, are the grant funds for projects we've just identified beyond the 2021 legislative year that we've earmarked basically for those funds, and they're not being financed. So again, this is through construction. It is subject to change after receipt of P3 bids. And the financial plan also looks at funding and financing to cover developer costs during operations and long-term debt service. So this graph starts, and there's some overlap between the last graph and this graph, because you have costs that transcend. All costs don't stop when operations start that are counted as construction costs. The solid blue line at the top is the projected sales tax revenues, and that's at an escalation of 1.5% per year. The green bars are the availability payments that are due the developer. So those are those payments that the developer gets to both make the asset available, in other words, fit for purpose and ready to receive a flood, and to maintain those facilities. The dark blue bars are debt service. So that's accumulation of all the debt that you borrow during construction that you've got to pay back long term. And the light green, or the dashed green line, that may deserve a little explanation. If you look closely, you can see that in 2036 through 2054 or so, the green bars exceed the sales tax line. And one good thing about a WIFIA loan, or a long-term low-interest loan, is you can sculpt the payments to within your ability to pay. So the sales receipts in 2026, 2027, and 2028 exceed what you have to pay the developer plus debt service. So that's the amount that's used in those out years where the bars are just barely above that to pay that amount. So the other thing I would point out is that in the previous editions of the financial plan, without that attractive loan and its terms, we had sales tax bonds out through 2084. This shows a project that's essentially paid off by 2062 from a construction standpoint. The other point that's important is that the annual payments are completely covered by the voter-approved sales taxes. There is no other source of revenue in the model that supports paying the debt that the Diversion Authority will have from constructing the project. So what are the next steps? Obviously, we're pursuing long-term loans and the confirmation of all the funding sources that we showed on the graph. We're prepared to provide updates to interested parties as requested and appropriate. We will be receiving input from our P3 proposers as the procurement progresses. Clearly, we're very interested in what they have to say with respect to the schedule and how they can re-engage, and are looking forward. John has been in contact with them all, and they are all indicating they're interested in re-engaging. We'll continue to monitor short and long-term interest rates and general financial market conditions and update the financial plan if anything changes radically. There is the next most likely public discussion of the financial plan would occur in the Water Topics Overview Committee meeting in September of 2020. They meet here in Fargo, and it's anticipated that there will be some presentations at that point with respect to the financial plan. And of course, this is all geared toward preparing and requesting funding during the 2021 North Dakota legislative session and coordinating with that entire process. So Joel has some closing comments, and we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Martin. So as we know, construction is ongoing at the moment. Anticipate construction to start ramping up over the course of the next year and be in full-scale construction as soon as the developer starts in 2021. We still have some legal challenges with the contested case hearing in the Buffalo Red watershed processes. Those will be concluded before the next legislative session, which will provide more clarity on some of the mitigative measures that are necessary on the Minnesota side and allow us to start to move forward with the Minnesota design and construction of the southern embankment. Federal funding is secured. It is subject to annual appropriations, so that is something that we need to keep a close eye on and assisting in helping the Corps receive the funding necessary to continue to move forward with their potential schedules. The Minnesota funding process is underway with the legislature. As I mentioned before, in the upcoming months here, we'll be focusing on the Minnesota legislature and engaging them, educating them on the project, and providing them the resources to make the proper decisions with the project. The P3 costs will also be locked in by the end of 2020, which is extremely important. That's going to be a big item for us to take a look at when those numbers come in. At that point, we may take another dive into the financial analysis and update once we get those locked-in numbers. Funding requests to complete the project will be made with the 2021 North Dakota legislature, which Martin explained before, would provide funding for those different elements that we've essentially deferred to later in the project build, with the intent of acquiring those funds at the 2021 legislature. So at this point, I'll open it up for questions that the board may have.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Martin. On page number 9 of your presentation, you talk about the P3 and the $763 million. To me, would it be possible that, obviously the interest rates are very low right now, and if we could, it would be preferable to do it right now, but could you give us, like even right now at today's interest rates, what it would be, if that's not right now, but I mean, if possible, and is there any way that we can try to lock that in sooner? Because my perspective is the interest rates are low now, and the sooner we can do that, the better. Is that possible? Could we have something like that?
Yeah, so Commissioner Pepcorn, that question was asked yesterday during Finance Committee meeting as well. And the market is very attractive right now for interest rates. As John pointed out, one of the things about the long-term low interest loans is that you do lock that loan rate in early when you take it out, and then that is locked in for the life of the repayment of the loan. So what's key is to move this schedule forward and get this out to market and get it bid. The private developers also bring about $400 million to the table. The earlier we can get that bid, they will also get advantage of that, and they will price that at the point that they bid the project in 2020. So Is there an opportunity to, borrow money early to fund these estimated milestone payments? Today, that's through the WIFIA loan, essentially. It's a combination of that plus some grant funds. So I don't know whether John wants to supplement with anything with respect to interest rates, but we have to get the bid to market.
No, you're absolutely correct, Martin. The way that we lock in the lower interest rates is by securing the WIFIA loan. One of the issues you would have if you went to the private market, even though interest rates are low right now, you do have limitations with both the bond issuance, looking at your sales tax numbers and how you can bond against that. Plus, under the IRS rules, you have to spend the funds in a certain amount of time. And so the best way to mitigate that interest rate risk is through using the WIFIA program or other available federal funding programs. And that's why we've been chasing after them.
I might add, Commissioner, as well, this slide here, these are all the available low-interest funding sources that we're currently pursuing right now. I can't underscore enough the advantage of the WIFIA program for this project. The potential to reduce 20 years of long-term debt and potentially reduce the debt service costs by $100 million is pretty significant for the project. So we are anxiously awaiting word from the EPA. If that doesn't move forward, we will be pursuing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers WIFIA program. The SRF loan that John had mentioned before, that's through the state of North Dakota. That's also tied to the low interest rate environment that we have right now. Some people say everything happens for a reason. Right now, with this size of a project and the low interest rate environment that we have, definitely an ideal time for us to be locking in these low interest loans.
Can I just make one more quick comment? So there's a lot of way smarter people in the room, but the recipe for a catastrophic flood, there's 3 main ingredients, and we got the first one right now. We have a very wet fall. The next thing you need is a lot of snowfall and a long winter with lots of snow. And then the third thing is a late thaw and then heavy rains. And so out of the 3, we got the first one, and I don't like that feeling. And so we got to get this done because we've all been through this too many times. But this feels like 2009 to me, a very wet fall. And we're fortunate that Grand Forks got a lot more rain than we did. Otherwise, I think we would be way more worried. So that's just my editorial comment. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions regarding the financial plan? Thank you for your work on that. I do, for the board, I would just like to make mention that there was a handout from Frederickson and Byron legislative update. I would ask that you read that at your leisure. It's just an update from them, and I think moving forward, we've asked for that from them on a monthly basis. And I'm thinking, Joel, maybe you can work with them in the future where we can actually do like a formal presentation, maybe quarterly, maybe you can present it on their behalf.
Yeah, I think the advantage now of having the executive director here is that we're going to be able to refine and make more efficient processes for communication with the board. So Frederickson and Byron will, I would anticipate report directly to me, and I'll report to the board their activities on a monthly basis.
All right, thank you. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 24th. Have any other business? Mr. Mayor.
If there's a trip to Washington, October 24th may want to be moved, just because your principals may not be here.
Yeah, I think we'll leave that to the board chair once more plans are, we have time to make those changes if need be, so. All right.
Mr. Campbell, we'll be working on those logistics, and right now we're working on setting up the meeting. So once we figure out schedules of the folks that we're going to be meeting out there, we'll get exact dates, and we'll report that to the chair, and she can adjust the meetings as necessary.
All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay. Second?
Second.
All right. We are adjourned.